Hello. Hey everybody, we're going to get going here. If you want to find your seats, you're not going to want to miss this riveting panel. You guys all seem really excited. Yes? No? There we go. A little enthusiasm.
Yeah.
All right. So we are going to get going. My name is Corey Weiss. I'm with Ipsy. Just curious, anyone out there heard of Ipsy before? Yes? The enthusiastic woman in the front and the others? Great. We are the beauty company of the creator movement, or influencer movement, which is why I've been asked to moderate this panel of esteemed panelists. Before we get going, I always like to survey the room so that we're talking with you, not talking at you. Who here is proficient in influencer marketing? Almost all of you. Awesome. How about who here is on the brand side? Great. What about the agency side? So we've got a, it looks like we've got a, is anyone here an influencer?
Oh, nice.
All right. Would anyone's mom or dad say that they're an influencer? You got all your parents will say you're influential. You're a very influential crowd. All right, enough of the jokes. I figured, you know, second day afternoon, all the cheesy jokes about Laurel and Yanny have been told. So I'm going to start at the end with Keith. I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves and get ready for a fun, hopefully lively panel.
Awesome. Hey guys, I'm Keith Hernandez. So I was formerly the SVP of branded content and social monetization at Bleacher Report, and before that, VP of international at BuzzFeed. But about 6 weeks ago, I left to start my own company, and it's in stealth mode, super stealth mode right now. So I'm excited about that.
Hey, I'm Mark Egan. I come to you from MediaCom LA, where I just moved here. I seem to be on a panel of New Yorkers, or former New Yorkers. So I come to this from the agency side, and particularly the media agency side, where we are trying to appropriately bring influencer marketing and different brand partnerships into the broader mix for our different clients.
My name is Anne-Marie O'Neill. I'm with Whale Rock Industries, which is a West Hollywood-based media and entertainment company. And we do many things. Among them are managing the digital lives of the Kardashian-Jenner sisters. So I guess I come to this conversation from the position of helping out some of the world's biggest influencers. We also have our own publishing brands that use influencers for content production and also for branded integrations. And in addition, we create TV and film productions from our studio.
Hi, I'm Kendra Bracken Ferguson. Excited to be here. And let's see, previously I was I guess I still am, the co-founder of Digital Brand Architects, DBA. For some of the influencers, you may know, we were one of the first agencies to represent bloggers back in 2009. Grew that company, it was acquired, and I left and started another company, The Brain Trust, which is a social media digital marketing agency. So we work with influencers to help them connect with brands, a lot of influencer seedings, influencer partnerships. We are building a very robust and proprietary influencer database, and my company Brain Trust was just acquired at the end of last year by CAA's Global Brand Management Agency. So we're now connected to one of the largest entertainment companies and looking at influencers through that lens.
Hello, my name is Ben Tata. I'm the president and co-founder of 605, which is a relatively new company. We're about 18 months old, and we focus on TV measurement and analytics. Unlike the legacy measurement system that uses data from thousands of households, we have over 12 million households where we capture second-by-second data. And more importantly, we're able to match that data using credentials from the households. So rather than trying to decipher device IDs or IP addresses, we actually have the authenticated credentials across all 12 million households. So when it comes to measurement, we're able to kind of match any ad exposure data, whether it's on TV or online, against that data set on behalf of our brands. So we look at things like brand lift, brand impact, and sales lift, and sales impact of television.
Hi. Howdy. I'm Simon Kelly. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Story Worldwide, based in Seattle, but I do spend some time in New York, so those are my New York credentials. As the name suggests, we are a brand storytelling company. We've been doing it for about 13 years. It used to be the longest elevator pitch in the world. I would have to explain why it was that a brand story was important. Now, I think most people understand that brand stories are important. And it's really based on the whole philosophy is based on the premise that interruption doesn't work anymore. Everybody knows that. Old, traditional advertising is less and less effective. And that rather than interrupting somebody's story, you have to be the story. And so we help brands find out who they are, get to their core identity, their narrative, the story platform, as we like to call it, before they start to create a single piece of content or reach out to other channels, whether it's influencers or other types of media channels. So that's what we do. There's two parts to what we do. It's we help brands find who they are, and then we create the stories once we have that platform, once we know what that narrative is.
Great. So thank you for those introductions. Hopefully you guys are even more excited now. I can tell you guys are like twitching in your seats to have this amazing brain power. So to make sure you get an ROI on today, you guys came out here to Digital Hollywood. I want to make sure that we're talking about things that are meaningful to you. Does anyone, you don't have to be shy, we're all friends now. Is there anything people want to walk away from in an hour and 15 minutes, a little bit smarter? Is there any particular topics you want us to cover? Yeah. Yes? Excellent, thank you. So we will get to that. We'll kind of tee up to where we get to relevancy and ROI to make sure that all this hype around influencer marketing makes sense. Yeah, another question in the back.
Yeah, I've noticed over the years there's been a change in the transition whether people should use social marketing or social media on maybe Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram or Pinterest. So I'd like you to consider, cover what platforms you think currently are the most popular and perhaps what type of companies and where you think it's going to go in the future.
Great, so we'll also touch base on the changing landscape of platforms and the way things are moving so quickly. How do you know where to double down? So thank you for that. Yes, Megan in the back.
Hi, I would love to hear about your thoughts on pricing and influencer marketing, and because the supply is far exceeding the demand, where do you think that's going and what do you think fair pricing looks like when it comes to marketing?
That is an amazing question. Megan works with me at Ipsy, and we think the same way. It's one of the questions we have prepared today, is that in this nascent stage where we're figuring things out, how do we get standardization? Yes?
Trying to work directly with the brand as opposed to going with the agency.
As an influencer to work directly with a brand.
No, actually with a content producer, which could...
Gotcha. Okay, yeah. I think that's going to be a great topic, which is when is it best to work with an agency versus brand direct? Because I think there's two sides of that story. Any other? This is awesome. I mean, we can end after this. I'm gonna drop the mic.
Piggybacking off of what he said, but metrics, understanding what is most important. Of course, it's going to vary depending on platform and influencer, but how to gauge that.
Yeah, metrics. I mean, that goes back to ROI, and I think I want you guys to get ROI for being here. And I think you don't just. There's a lot of crazy money being thrown around in influencer marketing. You want to make sure that it's working. So, if there's not, was there any others? Wow. Yes.
Yeah.
How to keep branded entertainment authentic.
Awesome. Perfect. That's a great. Authenticity is a word that's used a lot, but probably can't be used too much. So far we have 6 questions, and I have like 38 prepared. So cancel your plans tonight. We're camping out. Someone order pizzas. All right. Any others? All right. So the first question I actually had prepared really does have to. This is a very early stage still with influencer marketing. There isn't standardization, and we will get to pricing. But one of the things is just as we tee this up is really, and I'm going to start at the end with Keith, is how do we classify the categories of influencers? we hear the words micro-influencers, macro-influencers, mass influencers, mega-influencers. If you come up with another M, we'll throw that in too. But how do we actually have consistency and standardization of what that means from agency to agency, company to company, and influencer to influencer?
Yeah, great starting question. I feel like I'm on a senatorial hearing having to come like in on this.
I didn't do it.
No booster though, guys. No booster back here. So yeah, I think it is a little bit of the wild, wild west right now where a lot of people are defining it different ways. But I think the most generally agreed upon way to define micro, macro, and mega / mass is micro is any influencer with 1 to 10,000 followers. Usually they have high engagement on those 10,000 followers, and they have a specific niche that they're an expert at. And you're going to want to use those influencers for that. Macro will be anything 10,000 to 1 million, right? They might be a television personality at that point. They might be a reality star. They might have built their following on the social media platform. They're going to have, in general, a little less engagement, kind of post per post on a percentage level than the micro, but they will still have a high percentage. And then mass would be kind of the Rocks of the world, or the Kim Kardashians, these ultra uber celebrities that are doing multiple different things on multiple different facets and have more followers than many publications or many legacy TV outlets do.
Great. And then I know we did a call in advance. We'd all be really prepared for today for all you. Kendra, you had some opinions on, I recall, in terms of when do you use micro, when do you use mass? Is one better than the other? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's really interesting, even on this panel, and kind of how you started at the different definitions between agencies and media platforms. We throw an additional metric in there when looking at influencers. So we actually do micro up to the 10,000, and then we have a category of macro, which is in between that 10,000 and 500,000, and then we go up to the mass influencers. And I think for us, you know, especially coming from an agency perspective where we're trying to show an ROI to our clients, we found that sometimes these middle influencers do have the engagement and the reach that we need based upon what we're trying to quantify. So when we look at micro influencers and their importance, and everyone's like, oh, let's use a micro influencer, there's pros and there's cons to them the same way there is to the mass and the macro. And sometimes for brands that are new brands or launching something, you need to get awareness really quickly because it's hard to convert in terms of driving a sale or acquiring a new customer if you don't have awareness. So we generally start with the objective and we say, if we're going to use a micro influencer, is it to generate awareness? And if so, how many micro influencers do we need to actually generate the awareness that we want to help the brand get lift? So we started looking at the difference between micro, macro, and mass so that we could fill in the gaps between an awareness play, a conversion play, and then just a straight market lift play in terms of conversation online. I'm trying not to talk too long, so there's a lot of that.
Yeah, we're gonna try to get you all involved. That's awesome, Kendra. Thank you. I'm gonna actually now look to Mark, because we're talking, now we know the classifications, we know the different uses, Mark being from MediaCom and on the media side of the thing. So you're putting together a media plan. How do you see influencer marketing now fitting into the broader media plan when you're looking at display or various things?
Yeah, so one of the things that I discourage is thinking on a channel first basis. So what we try and do is employ what we call systems thinking, and that's really a consumer first mentality, and that's understanding a brand's core consumers and all the steps and all the touch points and all the experiences that they have en route to buying, experiencing, repurchasing your product, right? And then backing out from there, you know, how does influencer marketing actually play a role? What is the content that we need to address a particular barrier, or what is the connection that we need to build around that? So I think we have a sympathy for the traditional marketing funnel, awareness through purchase and all these things, but really more of an emphasis on points in that journey and where we can break down barriers, where there may be friction, and where influencers may help convince people to move through a little further.
Got it. Did anyone else want to comment on that? How influencer marketing plays into a larger plan? If not, we'll keep moving on. Because
yeah.
Did you want to go for it?
Well, I mean, I think it's really just I think the perception is changing of influencers as just being content producers. They're moving firmly into being distribution channels, and so from that point of view, I think it makes absolute sense to consider influencer marketing as part of your overall media plan, so that you're thinking about the audiences that you want to reach. How do you best reach them? And then so influencers become part of that consideration set, depending on who it is you're trying to reach. Is this a more effective way of reaching them than, say, doing something with Vice or doing some paid display,
right,
and so on?
Well, that actually leads to a question that I did have prepared for you, Simon, which is, if you're going to use... Perfect, yes.
Thank you.
If you are going to leverage the channel of an influencer because they own the eyeballs, how do you do it? And I think the gentleman in the back asked the question about authenticity. How do you make it authentic? So how do I make it feel that this influencer isn't just taking my money, but they really care about my brand?
Well, I think there's a couple of points there. One of which is the whole notion of why rent when you can own. So I think part of the challenge is to really make sure that when you are renting somebody else's audience, first of all, is there a way to build that into the ecosystem, part of the media plan, so that you can draw their followers into your ecosystem? Because if it isn't part of a way to get your own audience, then you're going to continue renting somebody else's audience. And the purpose of doing that, by the way, to create your own community, is that you can create much deeper levels of engagement than just a fleeting impression because you bought some eyeballs. And so, and then the way to really work with the influencer, and the way that we would do it is first of all, the brand that you're working with has to know what that story is, and there are various ways that you can work with the influencer to make sure that they understand the brand story. And what are the areas of storytelling that they can play in as they are promoting this particular brand? And that those areas of storytelling are authentic, going back to the question, I'm going to answer it, that is because you've done your research, because you know what the audience wants, you know how they think about the brand, and there are various narrative exercises you can go through before you sit down with an influencer or any other kind of channel, any kind of distribution channel. And it's really got to be, that you want to make sure that it is true. And I mean, every brand that's out there claims to be natural, claims to be good for you. Bullshit, it's not. So make sure, for the influencer's sake as well as the brand's sake, that it is whatever you claim to be true, and whatever the influencer claims to be true, that it is true, and better than that it's ownable, that it's something that only your brand in your category can claim to be true, and nobody else. And there's a whole process you can go through before you actually brief that influencer.
I have a little point to add on that. I think the word authentic is kind of becoming a word like viral, that it's lost all of its meaning in this world. I think the reality is we all play an artifice, and we're trying to get as close to authenticity as humanly possible, but it doesn't always happen. And I think if we eliminate what the true meaning of the word is on authentic, and just talk about intention and having the intention match the follow through, you have a more authentic relationship with the influencer, where you say, listen, this is about money, this is about putting it on there, but we want to make sure that the brand matches with your core belief systems, what you really want to bring out to your fans. And if the intention there is, yes, we will transact and have money for you to create great work, you have an authentic relationship there, but honestly, that content's not authentic. It's advertising, and we should be aware of that.
So from the influencer side, Anne-Marie, at Whale Rock, you have clients like Kim Kardashian. Obviously, there's no shortage of brands that would like to work with her. So on the influencer side, can you maybe talk about how in this case, mega influencer determines what brands they work with?
Yeah, I think that once you get up into the heights of the mega influencers / celebrities, their own brands are very important to them. They're not only monetizing them through brand relationships, that's one of their revenue streams. They're monetizing them on television, they're monetizing them through makeup lines, through attending events. So maintaining and preserving the authenticity, if you like, of their own brands is paramount to them. So there really is a two-sided conversation where they do get to pick and choose. You're right, there are a lot of offers on the table for people like that. They do get to pick and choose, and they really strive to only endorse things that they believe in and that they use. So, you know, from time to time, I've been surprised by the things the Kardashian-Jenner sisters will put on their social feeds, for example. They don't seem to be household name brands, but they're obviously something that they use and they like, and they're making money out of promoting them. I think to follow up on your point of authenticity in this kind of same realm as well, is that I feel like the way I have a publishing background, so I come from that content creation side of the business, and I feel like whether you're talking about a great commercial or a great Netflix show that you want to stream, that the quality of content and the reaction that content can gain from an audience, the emotion that it can elicit from that audience, whether it's, you know, laughter or tears or just empathy, or even if that emotion is, damn, I really want to buy that product. It comes down to a large degree to, yes, the authenticity of the relationship between the brand and the influencer, but also the quality of the content to captivate, entertain, inform, or really capture an audience. And I think that can't be lost in these transactions. That you know, used a great word before about fleeting. That's all it is. You know, if you have an influencer post on Instagram, it is fleeting unless it's captivating. So the quality of that content is all wrapped up. So when the gentleman asked about authenticity, or the lady asked about authenticity, I couldn't see who it was. A lot of that authenticity comes from the content itself as much as the person producing the content.
And I think that's the point that, you know, I know Keith mentioned that, it's just advertising, you know, come on, let's not kid ourselves. The Michelin Guide, who knows the Michelin Guide? Everybody, right? It's the guide, or used to be the guide. It has some competition now in France for which restaurants to go to. If you get 3 stars as a chef, it's you'll celebrate for forever. It's a big ad for a tire company. It's been around since 1920. And talk about authentic content. I mean, they have hundreds of inspectors going around making sure that they lift the cloche at exactly the same time, and if they don't, they get dinged a star and everything else. It's advertising, you know, and this whole sort of branded content thing has been around for a long time. And so I think to Anne-Marie's point, you know, it really does depend on the quality of the content. Sure, it's got to be authentic, and sure, it's, you know, you don't hide the fact that it's a big ad for whatever it is that you're promoting. But it's a trade-off. If the content that you produce or the experience that you produce is either useful or it's entertaining, then that's authentic in itself. Right. You know, that as an experience. You know.
Well, and I think, go ahead, Kendra. And even kind of combining the two, but from an influencer perspective, I think that's what's so important when brands look to influencers in terms of creating this content. And what happens is brands will come and say, oh, I want to work with this person, they would be great, but then they're dictating to them what to do, or they're handing them content that they want them to use. And whenever you see a really good collaboration that leads into authenticity or leads into good content, it's when the influencer and the brands can collaborate. Because the reason the brand wants to work with the influencer is because the influencer has an audience, they have a community, and that community is resonating with what the influencer is putting out there. So whenever you bring the two together and you can let the influencer help you create the content that their community wants and that your community will want, that's where the magic of influencers and good content comes together. And I think that as the brand, which Simon, you said earlier, it's up to the brand to use the right tools and the right systems to identify the right influencers that are going to be on brands for them to begin with, so that when they bring them in and they educate them on the brands and they're like, we're going to turn this over to you, they're not concerned because they've done their homework. They found the right person who's already aesthetically on brand, who has the right audience. So when they say, go and create this great ad or this piece of content for us, you know that you're getting the best quality content, the best influencer, and the brands wrapped around it to make it be authentic and to make it work.
So, did you want to jump in there, Mark?
Yeah, just to layer onto that, I think the one question you want to ask always, and that we ask is, do we have a common ambition together, the brand and the influencer? And if you have a common ambition, which is what you exactly described, you've got a chance to do something great. If you don't, it's going to be a rental scenario that Simon described.
So I wanted to piggyback, Kendra, on a comment you made about finding the right influencer. So yeah, it's great when you have that perfect marriage, but where do you go dating? Like where are we looking? How are we finding that right influencer?
And we've spent a lot of time in this specifically because there's brand people here, there's influencers here. We used to have a team of people that were just like scouring, reading blogs every single day, and it was this manual process. And we've now really focused on our influencer data mapping system that's really helping us not only look from the brand's perspective, but also the influencers, like going deep in who's their demographic, what are the psychographics around them, like what are their adjacencies in terms of things that they like, where do they live, like all of those things are so important. And so we've really spent a lot of time creating these mapping systems for influencers so that when we go to our brands, we can say, this influencer is great for you. You know, for the past 3 years, 50% of their posts have been about organic juice. They live in an environment. They're constantly working out. They use this type of yoga mat, this type of deodorant. They're friends with this person. Their audience actually shops at Whole Foods. Like, we go that deep because then that's what helps set it up. And there's a lot of tools, like you look at Creator IQ, you look at Demographics Pro, you look at all the different resources that are out there that if brands can take a second and get outside of how many followers, oh, they have 1 million followers, we're gonna use them, or they posted last week about an organic juice, that means they're the person. You have to go deep and look at the data and then draw the insights around it to connect back.
Awesome. And you use the word data, which will lead me to Ben and 605, where there's qualitative and quantitative, right? And we can find that quality influencer. Then we want to measure their efficiency or effectiveness. How does 605 go about that? Maybe you can talk a little bit about making sure the numbers match up.
Sure. And the short answer is we use a combination of both qualitative and quantitative. More recently, we're focused on kind of full funnel attribution, looking at the contribution that kind of each element of the marketing mix played. And what's really interesting is that while there's a chase to the bottom of the funnel, because conventional digital, Google do that really well, I think with social, it does, and influencer marketing, it does that mid-funnel better than other platforms. And TV obviously does real well at the top of the funnel, and carrying it all the way through. But I think a lot of it is really understanding kind of the customer journey and how each platform can be used to move audiences to the next step. And just like I think TV's response to digital is to really come to market with a lot of sales attribution capabilities, bottom of the funnel. I think those undervalue the huge contribution that it has on the upper funnel. And I think the same thing could be said for social and influencer marketing, is that so much of the value that's delivered is shaping perception, shaping one's view, and shaping favorability towards a brand, which happens kind of after awareness and before purchase. And it's essential, because otherwise, if you're really just focused on bottom of the funnel sales, I think you miss a lot of the opportunity to deliver value to clients that is being delivered, by the way. I think it's really just a measurement issue. So in our case, we'll look at brand engagement, we'll match brand favorability research, looking at different audiences and how their favorability is lifting against the ad exposure or brand exposure data, so that we're really taking an audience of favorables and seeing how we're moving them based on exposures across the funnel. And I think only when you can deterministically match that data do you get a real sense of that movement. Otherwise, it's like this back of the napkin study. Yes, it was brand lift of X, and this is how much you spent on the social campaign or influencer marketing, without really being able to map it back to, down to the individual exposure. And that's why the data that we have, we think, is really valuable, because we can actually map ad exposure level down to like real people and not just like devices and things like that.
And then one of the questions that came from the audience at the start was around metrics, obviously making sure ROI and how things are working and measurability. So does anyone else want to talk about how they're measuring and what is indicative of good KPIs and analytics, post-campaign analytics?
I can touch on a bit. So, so I think it's interesting. Influencer marketing tends to get grouped into a bucket around trial, right? We ask people to try out a product, and we try and get things in people's hands, or get them to purchase in some way. Analyzing all that on an apples-to-apples basis with everything else you do is tough, right? You kind of look at it directionally on a channel basis. I think it comes down to how you collect data, and my worry about influencer marketing is sometimes it is collected in a different place, and you never have an apples-to-apples comparison. So we work very closely with Fullscreen in particular, because we have a joint data project where we have a dashboard that we use to measure a lot of different things, but it also connects directly into our broader dashboard so that we understand how those metrics are collected alongside everything else that we do. So we're looking at content very broadly, from our paid ads and also the content that influencers put out. So there's calibrating around influencer marketing as it is today in the KPIs that are, let's say, broadly around trial, right? What I don't think people are doing, and I think big brands need to be doing, is thinking about the power of influencer marketing and those KPIs more broadly. So I think everyone in here knows who probably your first 10% of customers are, your low-hanging fruit, and who the influencers are that serve that audience. But I bet most people don't know how to evaluate those influencers that are going to reach your growth areas, and how to prioritize those. That's a big challenge for people. So where I see also metrics moving is in how influencers can deliver into uptick in broader culture. I think influencers tend to be on the forefront of campaigns, and I honestly think they have a role to play downstream in validating what brands do more broadly, because we've got a lot of fickle consumers out there today, right? And I think they have a real role to play in saying, hey, no, I validate this product on a very, very broad basis. So that cultural uptake should be, I think, something that people begin measuring.
Can I talk a little bit about that? Because, I love that, because it is hard on the publisher side to do these attributions that say, look at all the products flying off the shelf. So we, at Bleacher Report, we worked a lot with kind of some of those softer analytics. And one of the things that we did for Under Armour in particular, they have Steph Curry as one of their endorsers, and his shoes last year were lovingly called dad shoes or Obama shoes, and like younger kids just thought they were corny. And so we looked at the overlap between our House of Highlights handle that was really catered towards a 12 to 20 youth audience and the Under Armour handle, and there was less than 7% overlap. Now, Under Armour is catering to a youth basketball market, and there's a youth basketball handle with 7 million Instagram followers. How is this happening? So through the program, we started to identify micro-influencers and macro-influencers that we can use on the House of Highlights channel. At the end of the program, there's 44% overlap between Under Armour's followers and House of Highlights followers. And so we use that as saying we're shifting the cultural trends. We're helping people become aware of the brand that's there.
And I think that plays into the notion that data, obviously data is really, really super important. But there's there's a notion that data is the plural of story, right? And so if you can unpack the data and really get down to the individual stories that are being told and the way that those stories are changing based on your activities, whether it's with influencers or other forms of marketing, then you really get to understand the level of impact that you're making. And Jeff Bezos, came across a quote from him a couple of weeks ago who said, I'm a big, we have data up the wazoo. Amazon measures everything, if they've got data to measure everything. But he's a big fan of anecdotes too. And that whenever anecdotes and data are in conflict, usually the anecdotes are right. And so
That's a good. Finish it up.
that's it.
That's a really good example because, at the very base level, when we're looking at analytics, we have the traditional things. We have impressions, we have engagements, we have likes, we have shares, we have video views. And we always look at that as how does that connect in terms of awareness, affinity, and advocacy. And so we know that if you have those metrics, you can potentially connect the dots. What we've been looking at, which I think is really smart, is there's kind of two ways of thinking. Like when we worked with Tory Burch back in the day when we were launching her blog, we had all these influencers that were like, I don't like Tory, I don't like that logo on my shoes, and all these things. And when we launched Tory's blog, we started to see an increase of conversations happening online, specifically around people talking about the content of that blog. And we had an influencer who said, I was literally walking by Tory Burch and I went in and I spent several $100s. And she's like, the reason I was connected to that was because I started reading the blog, and the blog was the first thing that I read. And so our pathway to purchase came through the blog content that we can't necessarily measure. We also didn't have a direct correlation to say to Tory's team, oh my goodness, we get credit for that sell in store. But what we do know is that if we can be in the places where our audiences are, which is why the platforms themselves are very important, and other media properties, we know that when people have to make a decision on what to buy, hopefully they're reconnecting with us because psychologically we've been in the places, we've been serving them that content. So sometimes in social, it's hard to have a direct correlation to the sell. When we can do that, it's great. We drove 1.6 million for another brand last year just in influencer programs, and we could directly track that through coupon codes, through bounce backs, through everything. It was tied. But then the CMO said, I would actually give you credit for so much more because of these soft metrics. Because when we looked at the difference in conversations, originally we had more people on Twitter talking about that brand, and that was customer service issues. By the end of the year, the conversation was greater on Instagram. Instagram was where all the beauty girls were, which meant that we tipped that conversation in our favor. We drove a cultural conversation. We were part of a cultural movement around beauty, around hair care. And so we got credit for that, and that's really important. So sometimes these softer metrics can actually give you a greater sense of what's happening, what conversations you need to be in. And we've really started looking at this notion of relationship reach. And for us in our brand, and it's funny, we work with Under Armour too, we were at an event and an influencer essentially got on stage and started talking about the brand and all these things. And my client was like, we knew that influencer loved us, but we couldn't figure out how they got our product. So we went to the influencer and we were like, how did you get that product? And the assistant said, oh, I go to that store all the time. I buy the product. He loves it. He loves it. That's relationship reach. You can't judge that, but the relationship of us being there, interacting with the influencer, talking about our product, that reach was far greater than us trying to seed something in hopes that he got it. We'd never know if he did, and he never posted about it. So it's an interesting dynamic between the hard metric, the soft metrics, and how you can kind of gamify the conversation and be integrated if you're looking at different conversations and cultural relevancy.
Absolutely. So let's get to the audience question of pricing. So we are finding the appropriate influencer. We're making sure that there's that relationship. We're checking metrics of their efficiencies and engagement, awareness, reach, all those things. How do we price it now? There is no standardization. Some of us you try to use traditional digital media math to so it is as close to apples and oranges or apples and apples or whatever fruit you like. But who has some thoughts on pricing so people out there, when they're considering these programs, know that they're priced accurately?
Yeah, what do you buy?
Well, it's a blend.
Like a fair price?
It's a blend of. I think there's two perspectives, really, at least. I think there's, we'll work with MCNs to because they've got sort of a front end feel for, let's just call it the going rate and sort of who's getting what, right? And I think that line of sight is important. But then I think, at least from a media agency perspective, I think it's really important to understand what you plan to get out of it. Is projecting out what kind of content is going to get out there, forecasting, how many people that's going to reach, and putting real hard values against that versus paid media impressions, and having a sense of that valuation. And if you want to put sort of an influence factor on the source, you can do that. So for instance, just sort of a regular old ad that someone might see programmatically as a piece of content versus being actually on the blog, and what is that worth to you? And I think ultimately over time, if you're, and again, this comes back to the data collection thing and having that harmonized, as you collect that over time and compare those apples to oranges, you'll be able to work out those factors. But I think it's very different by audience, right? The more niche your audience is, probably the more valuable it is, and your willingness to pay is from specific sources.
But do you think there's anything in terms of some prices done, a video gets 1 million views, can it be priced based on a CPM, and then there's the right CPM? Or on Instagram, often you're paying, based on followers. Like, it's all over the board, and I don't think anyone has it right. And then often what will happen is people will price a program, and then there'll be an influencer, they'll do it for like pennies on the dollar, and they ruin it for everyone. So
yeah. I would recommend it for the influencers out there, try not to get into the commodification, the CPM, because you're doing yourself a disservice, right? Like, think of yourself as a small agency. You're not only putting something on your brand, you're also delivering consultative resources. You're digging in and learning more about the brand. You're learning more about you're telling them about your audience. You're giving them a little sliver of what they pay good money to creative agencies, social agencies, buying agencies to do. You're also taking the photography. You're buying new outfits. You're setting up lighting. Your post production. All of that stuff should be part of that package. And if you just sell it as, well, I average 100,000 likes, you're doing yourself a disservice there. So don't get into that CPM game if you can. But then if you're The Rock, go for it. Do the CPM game.
And that's a really good point, because so many, it's like I have two hats of it, kind of being on the manager side and the agent side, and then now being on the agency side of what we pay. And that's a really good point, because like in counseling influencers, if a brand is going to pay an ad agency like 50 grand to do a commercial and they hire you instead, you're being paid for your talent. So you still have to get a set, you have to get a location, you need to get a stylist, you have to deliver the same quality. So you have to think of it that way versus like, I'm an influencer and I'm going to do a post. Like, you're essentially replacing a photographer, a set designer, a stylist. So you have to make sure that you're looking at your value. From a pure play, like, I'm going to hire this influencer, I mean, we see costs across the board. And we hear from brands, like, we don't want to work with, like, the mass and the mega stars because we're sick of paying 6 figures. Like, I don't want to pay this influencer 100 grand to do this post. And part of it is when you're a brand and you're looking at the influencer, you have to look at, like, there's a few things, like historically, how long have they been around, what have they done, how active is their audience. Like, if there's an influencer who has tons of followers but their audience is never talking about purchasing jeans or purchasing cosmetics, or they're all aspirational, like, and you know that they're not going to be able to afford your $300 sunglasses, then like, you probably shouldn't be paying that influencer to do a campaign for you, because there's not going to be a return. On the flip side, if you're that same brand and you just need an awareness play, so your goal is, let me pay this big influencer so lots of people can talk about me, I don't care if I sell, then that's different. But it's a tricky thing, because you do have, and this kind of goes back to like when you use a brand and agency, like managers and agents are taking commission. So they also are saying to you, yes, pay us $10,000. They may go and tell someone else, pay us $50,000 for the same thing. And it's hard to say if it's right or wrong because, to your point, there's no standardization. A lot of brands are saying, I'm going to go work with the micro-influencers. I'm not going to pay the micro-influencers. And it's like, come on. If you're using an influencer to create content for you, to host an event for you, to be your brand ambassador, you pay them the same way that you would pay a model, the same way you would pay a photographer, the same way you would pay a baker. So you also have to look at like the skill and the value of what they're providing, and then also the audience and the reach. I mean, we work with great influencers where we can get things for $500, but they're doing it because they know that the reach and the exposure that we're going to give to them is actually going to be worth it. I also am not opposed to, like, for the influencers in the room, if you're starting out and you're trying to figure out brand relationships, there's certain things that you need to do to get into the game. So if you're coming out and you're trying to tell a brand, like, I want $5,000, it's not there yet. Use that brand to help you make relationships, to get you out there. Let that brand put you in their catalog on their website if you're at a place where you need that exposure. If you're not, and you're Kim Kardashian, you're definitely not doing it for that. But I think that it's something that we continue to see, and I think that the more people have open conversations about it, and the less that brands are able to get away with things, agents, managers, agencies ourselves, and the influencers are really holding onto their value and looking at what they're being asked to do and measuring it against what traditionally people would pay for things. I think that helps.
I think that's what's going to happen. I think that eventually this is going to evolve. You know, it's still very nascent in terms of pricing models, in terms of how it's being measured, and so on. And I think that there will be a standard at some point for the influencer industry as a whole. And partly because you don't know what you're paying for. You know, there was a piece in Ad Age a couple of weeks ago about 72% of some hotel chains' influencer program had fake followers. So you're paying based on these bots that are basically upping the prices that brands are paying. So brands are going to want to know that every dollar they're spending is being spent with real people that they're trying to reach. Number one, and number two, I think the way that it's going to, so I think maybe there'll be an audit, some kind of, the way that magazines used to have the ABC, the way they would, the Audit Bureau of Circulation, and maybe that'll happen with social channels and so on, because it's the sort of the Facebookification of things, as I think is a term that there's this sort of black box, will guarantee you X number of impressions. And I think that's the second thing that's going to change, is that the pricing model will move from impressions, fleeting or not, to deeper engagement levels. What happened next? Did somebody actually do something as a result? And you can prove that it was a real person that did it, ultimately, obviously, leading to a purchase. I mean, that I think is so that to the extent that influencers can help bring the industry along in that direction, I think it'll work well for them, and it'll work well for brands and the industry as a whole.
Anyone else have any other thoughts around pricing? I like that you guys talked about value exchange, and it kind of emphasizes that it's a partnership with the influencer. It's not just transactional, that it's two-way, and that value is being delivered from both sides. There was a question about platforms, and I guess being concerned about what platform to use, and as we know about data breaches and algorithms changing, it is challenging. Does anyone want to share any insights or thoughts on determining what's the appropriate social media platform?
I have a question for you.
Okay.
About the platform.
Do you want to get us their seats?
Not that question.
Well, I answered here.
We're just going to ignore you now.
Not yet.
Well, no, I want you to answer, but can you also talk about, because so many of our clients are like, should I build my own? And
that's
the
a very good
Kardashians are
It's a very good question.
You know what I mean? So when we talk about platforms, like, you're the expert in terms of, like, do I even go off platform and build my own?
That's a very good question. So I think from my perspective on platforms goes back to what audience you're trying to reach, and that should always be the number one question. Who is your target? Who are you trying to talk to? Because you're going to talk to a very different person on Snapchat than you're going to talk to on Facebook. So whether you're going through Facebook directly and buying reach, whether you're going through an influencer on Facebook, whether you're going through a publishing brand on Facebook, you're really you're starting with to whom am I speaking? Who am I trying to reach? And I think that should be your guiding light in terms of which platform to choose. I don't think any of the platforms is necessarily 100% safe from, anything from data breaches to fake followers or anything else at this early stage, which we've seen unfold over the last few months. So I think that, you can probably fill in some gaps with that, but I think primarily the number one focus is what's the audience. Also, there are other factors like, is this a very is it a quick visual, or am I trying to tell an entire story? Is there a message that really needs to be in video, or is it a message that can be in a quick photo or picture gallery? So the medium and the medium that suits the platform is important, the audience is important, and then it trickles down from there. In terms of being an influencer who wants to have his or her own platform, that is something that we have had a fair bit of experience with over the past few years at Whale Rock. As you can imagine, from the time we started working with the Kardashian-Jenner sisters, there really was a parade through our offices of different celebrities and influencers and brands, for that matter, who were really interested in creating their own platforms. And for the most part, they were fantastic and interesting conversations that usually led to us not doing business together. And the reason is because not only do you have to have a really massive and engaged reach to make your platform competitive in the busy lives of your audience with their Instagram and Facebook and Snapchat accounts, you also have to, in many cases, have more than just one thing to sell and one thing to monetize. So for example, Kim Kardashian West's app is a place where she is not only having subscribers pay money because they get to have exclusive access to content, although that is still a huge driver of our subscriptions. It's also because they get early drops of her products and they're really interested in beauty. They, from time to time, get exclusive, or the potential for, the promise of exclusive access to Kim, or if not Kim, then someone from her world. So the idea of having multiple things to sell or multiple touch points for the audience is almost as important as having the scale and engagement of that audience to justify having your own platform. The other piece of the puzzle is we work with some smaller influencers that have their own platforms that do incredibly well because they have very niche audiences that are hyper engaged. So an example is we work with Adam Savage, who is of Mythbusters fame, but is really the Pied Piper of the maker movement. He's kind of king of the geeks and nerds, and he's wonderful. He's just a joy to work with. But also his audience is so incredibly dedicated. They will pay for an annual subscription that is largely just about content. There is a special gift when you sign up, but it's not a cheap subscription. It does last all year. It's not something that you turn off after a month. But they're so dedicated to
Can I ask you about
niche that it becomes really important.
Could you have identified and predicted who that audience would be before you actually launched it? Because I really believe that that increasingly we're going to go beyond traditional demographics because of there's a common set of interests that bring a tribe together, and you can't possibly define who those people are and predict who those people are, and they'll surprise you because it'll go through demographic barriers, it'll go through household income barriers, it'll go through the traditional ways in which we break down audiences, or at least in the way that we have in the past. And I think that's a great example of a tribe that comes, the maker tribe.
Yeah, it's almost defining fandom.
How do you find a maker tribe?
Yeah, it's almost defining fandom. It's you almost want to create a matrix of engagement, and I think engagement is larger and more valuable than any other piece of the puzzle.
Right.
It's a really interesting point, because I know in TV and looking at those that are avid for particular shows, there's a big difference between even avid viewers and socially active avid viewers. And being able to basically leave demos off to the side and really just look at other attributes. What other shows do they index high on, and what are the other kind of brand related attributes, whether it's favorability and things like that. Because I do think brand favorability is a really important metric. So if you can drive an audience from unfavorable to favorable, and even if it's with qualitative data mapped to the social engagement data, that's hugely valuable because there's very few platforms that can really do that. A lot of awareness building platforms. There's response and impulsive platforms like search and digital display, but very few can really move from unfavorable to favorable. And then if you can really get that fandom piece within that, you know, all that the programmers really need to do is understand the most socially active viewers of their shows and give them access to free content and things like that, and things blow up pretty significantly. The challenge is really getting the data and the insight, and that's where like walled gardens don't work, you know, because you can't match the two data sets. And that's, you know, we spent a lot of time kind of breaking down the walled garden in pay TV by making the data accessible, and it's kind of ironic, you know, that we've kind of broken that wall down, and yet there's, you know, a lot of digital platforms that have, you know, been putting brick by brick, you know, these walls that prevent you from accessing the data, even non-PII data. And I think that's something that's got to change.
It's also about creating, oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
It's also about creating original content for the platform, to the strengths of the platform that you have there, right? And this kind of goes back to human behavior and natural behavioral science. Like, think about yourself and how you create for those platforms. You don't put all the same content across all different platforms. At least I hope you don't. Like, either you'll have an extremely boring Snapchat channel or a really lit LinkedIn profile. Either way, like you're missing the audience. And so think about it that way as well. You can use the same influencer across multiple different platforms. You just need to talk to that influencer about what are we talking about, like what's the best way to reach in this this way. And so a lot of times we work and we say, okay, this is how we're going to cut it up for Instagram. This is how we're going to cut it up for YouTube. This is how we want you to talk on Snapchat, because it does matter. You know, these are different codified languages that we all speak, but we do put on those hats when we go to the different platforms.
That's exactly, I was going to say, I was going to talk about like channel segmentation strategies, because it's really important that brands take the time to look at each platform. And to your point, you can use the same influencer, you can use the same storytelling nature of and like set of content, but like what you're saying on Facebook should be different. Even if it's around the same vein, you can celebrate National Dog Day across all of your platforms, but the way that you do it should be different. And I think that if you look at the segmentation strategy, like how much of your audience is here? Are you using Facebook as a paid social mechanism? If that's what you're using it for, because you know you can get email signups, you can get subscribers, you can get downloads, like then that's a different conversation than if you're using Instagram from a beautiful content perspective and I'm going to do storytelling through visual nature, versus that same company using LinkedIn as a B2B strategy to, you know, recruit and retain new employees. So it's really important that you take a step back before you start creating all this content. Like, we have brands investing in so much content, but they didn't segment out their channels and figure out like why they're using it, how long they're using it, like who's the audience there, and then you bring paid social and it's a whole other.
I think it's that's a really good point, and I think it's it's really the difference between narrative and story. And I know those words are used interchangeably a lot, and I was struggling with it myself, and I've done it myself. I don't do it myself anymore. I'm now cured of this. I've gone to SA, and I'm Story Anonymous, and I'm cured. I've been free of narrative and story for 3 weeks now. The definition I came across was that narrative is best defined as a system of stories. And I think that speaks to what you're talking about, where, you know, if you have a core narrative that is the authentic brand story that's ownable, then you can tell a series of stories that ladder up to that narrative, but you can tell them in different ways based on the audience and based on the channel. And that, I think, is certainly a way that, you know, media planners and brands should sort of think about it. Right.
So hopefully that answered the question that was originally from the back about what platform to use. I want you guys to all be honest for a minute. So since we've been doing this panel, who's checked their Instagram account at least once? All right, we appreciate honesty. Who's checked their Facebook account? All right, what about Snapchat? So if you want to reach people at digital entertainment conferences, it's Instagram. All right, it wasn't funny. Sorry, you guys are getting tired. Maybe.
You made us laugh.
All right, so I have some more questions, but we got about 10 minutes left. Has this conversation and dialogue has elicited any new questions from the audience? Yes, we'll get to both of you.
Hi, when you're talking about the blog, I wanted to know how much time had passed till you saw that ROI with the blog that you were putting out, and that also made me wonder how much of a time frame do you look for an ROI when you decide to get invested with the influencer?
So that's a really good question. It takes time and it takes patience. Like, we have brands that are like, I started this, I redid my website, I have all these things, I've got this influencer, and they're expecting to see something in like 3 months. There's things that you can see in 3 months, like, are people engaging with the content? Have your likes gone up? Are you getting more traffic? But that just gives you a sample to then go back and say what's working and what's not working. I think that it does take time, especially if you're launching a new brand, if you're revitalizing a new brand, if you're switching platforms. There has to be time to actually test things, to try new marketing formats, to bring in influencers and let that happen. Because you can see a spike. Like, we would partner with an influencer on the blog. We did something with a mom and a daughter, and we saw a spike immediately. We got tons of traffic. It didn't sustain because we needed to continue doing those types of partnerships because we saw that the audience liked seeing that type of content. So it's really, we encourage, like, every Friday we look and we do a snapshot, but then at the end of the month we go back and we go content by content. What worked? What had the highest engagement? Why? What happened in the world? Like, was that hashtag appropriate? How many other people were using it? What was the cultural conversation? So that we can start to get us to a place where we know what our formula is specific to that brand, and then we start to see our ROI. Like, as soon as you do a shift in anything or you put something up, you should be paying attention. You should see something. That doesn't mean that it's going to be in the direction that you want, but it does mean it's going to give you the data to figure out what's the direction that you want to go. But things don't happen overnight. Like, it does take time to build. And now with the platforms, if you're starting right now, like, with everything that's happening with the algorithms, it's going to be a slow burn. You're going to have to use different tools and tactics and, like, execution strategies to build a community. We could go deeper.
I want to go a little point on that too. I talk a lot about being data informed, not data driven, right? And the differences between those two things. So over the summer, on Instagram, there are these things called gender reveal videos that became really, really popular. I don't want to get into the whole thing of like gender and when you get to choose that, but like it was interesting because we saw it pop up with professional athletes and we started covering it a lot. And these videos would get 2-3 million views easy without us really doing much to it. And if you're data driven, you look at that and go, we should do more gender reveal videos. If you're data informed, you go, what is it about these videos that's interesting, that's compelling our audience to stay? Well, one of the things was they're about 20 to 30 seconds long, right? They're short. There's a payoff at the end. It's going to be purple or sorry, it's not going to be purple. Oh man, it's going to be pink or it's going to be blue, right? And you don't know that until you're going into it. It's also humanizing athletes. It's usually in their backyard. It's with their buddies. It's with their significant other. It's bringing them into this relationship. So we took those 3 data points. We said, okay, something short has a payoff at the end and it's going to humanize athletes, and put together an editorial profile for the next 3 to 6 months that we can bring to brand partners. That's way more interesting than going, hey, do you want to sponsor the gender reveal videos that we do next month?
Cool. We'll get all your questions in the front row.
So where do you find these influencers? Are they on Fiverr? Or if they are on Fiverr, you know, then, like you said earlier, we don't really know if they really have real followers. So where besides going to an agency like you guys' agency, where would I, if I were in search of these influencers for my market, where would I find them? What platform?
There are a bunch of tools out there. I just don't know if any of them are free.
I mean, other than like manually going and searching, like, I think that there's really great tools, and we can talk about it afterwards, that can give you a base. But the tools are the tools. Like, you still have to go through and look and identify like the attributes of the influencers, but a lot of it is just being online. Like you've got to take the rabbit hole. Like you have to go through, find one influencer, who follows them, what are the conversations they're in, what are the different audiences. You got to platform jump. You have to see who's leading it. You need to check hashtags. Like use hashtag trackers. Like who like whatever the hashtag is for you. Who are the influencers that are carrying that conversation? But it's really important that you are in it and that you're looking for yourself. We use the platforms as a tool to get us started, but then we also use the human data and our insights to really go deep and see if that's going to be the right influencer. That's a loaded question.
We're going to go, he had his hand up, then we're going to get to you in the front.
You look at the big brands, Colgate, you're starting to see this trend where, you know, there used to be the BBDOs, the MDs, but they go direct when you work with the ad agencies and they're working down. But I'm also now starting to hear the ripple in the water that they're actually starting to go directly to some of these content providers, even, you know, have you seen the shift? Where's the shift going with, you know, the agencies compared to going directly to the brands? Is there a shift at this stage of the game that direct to
Everything's shifting. Look, I think, you know, to be realistic, I mean, I think probably all of us at this table in some fashion are dabbling in and out of different spaces, and influencer marketing is no different. So you know, within WPP, you know, I've got creative agencies dabbling in influencer marketing, I've got some media agencies, I've got the PR agencies, and certainly sometimes brands directly. I think sometimes, I think oftentimes when it's really custom content, sometimes the brands keep that, anything that brands like to keep close to home and have to have control over, they tend, there's more of a gravitational pull to bring that in-house. And I think wherever, in whatever ecosystem you're working in, whoever understands best the brand and the relationship with the consumer is probably best positioned to manage that. Again, it goes back to knowing the audience and knowing what that common ambition, as I said, is. So I leave that open-ended, and honestly, different clients work in different formations that they're comfortable with. I see it all over the place.
I think that's especially true with, you know, the larger brands that are going to channels like Vice.
Yeah.
T-Brand Studio and so on, and that, I suspect, I don't know for sure, but I suspect that those are direct relationships that in many cases, in some cases it may be that the agency brings in Vice or T-Brand, but I'm pretty certain, and I think to your point, that, you know, they're, especially with the sort of rich content experiences, that it'll be, you know, an in-house team that brings in the Vice channel and brings in their content creators and obviously the Vice audience. To do that.
And it feels like there's this yearning always on the big publisher side, because I've been at some big publishers, to go client direct and to help go client direct. And I think some of that's misguided, where they look at the buying agency as a middleman, right? Like if you listen to a podcast, you know, we're cutting out the middleman, no more middlemen, but like they're missing the strategic value that a buying agency actually provides, right? And so I'll give Mediacom a little props here. 7 or 8 years ago, working with the Volkswagen team, and we went in there and had a strategic conversation with Mediacom to better understand the client and better understand what Deutsch was trying to do with the Super Bowl spot. And by doing that, we had a much more qualified conversation when we actually sat down with the Volkswagen client. And then when the RFP went out, I was at BuzzFeed at the time, BuzzFeed's example was in the RFP. Now, I got calls from my friends saying, how are you already in the RFP? Well, it's because we worked with the agency and we put together, when we helped them craft that strategy. So I think the general nature is, you know, people say go directly to the client, but the approach that I take with salespeople is you have to understand the entire spectrum that client's working with, right? They're working with PR, they're working with social, they're working with their buying agency. Oftentimes they have select influencer programs that they're working with. Sometimes they're working with, you know, Andreessen Horowitz has them come to VC days, right? So understanding all those elements that influence that client is going to help you give a better pitch.
I'd say where it also affects distribution is often where they take that direct.
I think, you know, the tension, though, is that the real source of truth on measurement is their own CRM system and their own CRM data. Yep. And I think there's been proxies for their CRM data. You know, in the case of TV, you know, it's age and gender-based stuff, which means almost, nothing to a lot of these brands that are really more interested in gold card customers or whatever their attributes are. So I think while there, without a doubt, there is and will continue to be a role for the intermediaries, I do think, though, that the more rooted in kind of a CRM-based approach any of these initiatives are, the better able we will be in measuring and also kind of representing it in a way that's relevant to the client, whether it's changing favorability or driving more people in the funnel or, running a promotion and generating X amount of sales. And I think the source of truth for that, in a lot of cases is the CRM data. And we've seen, a lot of the more progressive brands like Walmart and Uber that we work with are very data informed. I like the distinction because in a lot of cases they may see a lot of big data and you can make conclusions about that, but until you really tease it out, it's kind of premature. But they use the data to inform every aspect of their business. It's just that media is one of these things where they have had less kind of engagement with. And now I think, but there is a way to make it work. I just think that, it's agencies and it's intermediaries that do as much as they can to port the activity back to the CRM data as possible, just because that's ultimately what the ROIs are going to be based on.
And can I add one thing from a social media perspective on that? Because it's interesting, like for us, the pure community management in terms of actually putting the piece of content on Instagram and hitting post, we really encourage our clients to do that directly, whereas as the agency we're come to us for strategy, because we're talking to so many agencies, we're meeting with the platforms all the time, and we're getting out of our office, so we're seeing so much, so we're come to us for the strategy, let us put insights on top of, that's so good, insights on top of your data, because we're painting such a better picture. But then we'll say to our client, but the actual posting, get somebody internally, things happen so fast, let us guide your content, let us give you strategy, let us give you insights, and then you guys post that directly. When you get into influencers, a lot of our clients are we just don't have the bandwidth. To your point, we don't have the bandwidth to look through 100 different influencers so that we can identify the 20 that we're going to seed our product to this month. We have a client where we see 250 influencers every month. The sheer volume of that with the brand trying to go direct, and then the dashboard of which we track, did they open it, did they post it, did they put on the stories, that's where it gets tricky. But we'll say to our clients, look, you're looking for a global ambassador, cool, here's some recommendations, have your head of PR reach out to them, establish the relationship, let them come in, we'll guide you on that. But it's the volume. When we're doing paid social, our clients, yes, they get, and I'm talking about paid social specifically from influencers. So we do a lot of it too. We look at influencers as media channels and distribution. So when we're putting together our plans for social, we're running paid social through influencers channels. We negotiate that, it's part of every single deal. So for some of our clients where they're actually running their own paid social internally, they'll say to us, we don't want to be going into the influencers channels. We don't want them in our Facebook ads manager. So then they turn to us to do it. So there's just so many different components to it now that there's value in going direct and there's value in using your agencies for scale, for insights, for intel, and that strategy piece.
So I saw two questions. We're running out of time. We'll do speed round right now. So this gentleman, I think, had a question.
Data. You want to know how, from an agency, how's the brand not just being lifted, but I've been talking about how much money are we actually making as a result of us putting our brands through WPP, Omnicom, one of Saatchi, one of the guys. That's the question. The money part.
Specific to influencer marketing.
Yeah. The money part. Yes, if I spend $10,000
I'm just going to say that's going to be different for every client and every objective and every audience. There's not going to be, if I get that, that's like a black box. It would be a black box answer. If I'm honest, that's my point of view on
Yeah,
that.
I mean, I think it's tricky. Like in the example where I gave of the 1.6 million, we literally, for our client, we took a whole year and then we had to break out of those costs. Our agency fee, we broke out like how much we spent for all the videos that we created to promote it. We did an event, we took our, I mean, it's like ROAS, I guess, for you, but we literally, we stripped down everything and then we landed with that number, and that we got to that number because we specifically gave influencers like promo codes, we used coupon links, we like bounced back to retail. We were set up with our client so that we could track everything because we had to. But that's one example. We did some of the similar things with another client and we didn't have that same ROI. So it is, I mean, it's really different. And then are you adding in all of the hard costs, are you adding in the soft costs, and like revenue has so many different things.
And I'd say please, you know, I worry about the ROI thing because it's sort of the underlying assumption is that you're comparing everything against everything, and in fact, it all plays off each other. So we're literally looking at all the paid, owned, and earned, and actually have a simulator to understand how that plays off each other. So I just. I'd love to give you a number, but I don't think it's that straightforward, and I think I'd be negligent in actually.
You know, the other thing about attribution is generally you'll do an attribution window to capture lift within a period of time.
Yeah.
But to do ROI properly, you have to look at customer lifetime value. So what's the, you know, and lifetime value many years. Now, I'm not saying advertisers or brands are going to be patient enough to stick around for that, but looking at the trend in multiple purchases over a period of time is going to take you outside of an 8-window attribution period.
The last question.
Question is related to the whole, do you want to get leveraging the models of seat cost per install?
So cost per, yeah, I mean,
Like,
that
so
metric.
we experimented with that. Another sneaker company. We worked with New Balance, but it wasn't the entire picture, right? So what we did is we created 4 original videos with Francisco Lindor, who's a shortstop for the Cleveland Indians. We looked at those as the opening salvo, the opening joke at a party, right, to get the audience interested, and then took those, I believe it was around 10 million views, and then siloed them off. So we created that audience bucket, and then we created another one that hadn't seen it, so like an exposed, and created original display advertising, original Facebook advertising that was bought on a CPA basis based on, did you see that Francisco Lindor branded content? Did you see that Instagram thing that we did? And drive it down. The reality of it is, like, the money matched the CPA, right? Like, the more you put into CPA, the more it's going to go. But we would have never have done the deal without kind of that bigger opening story, because then we would have just been transactional there.
Cost per install.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, they're willing to pay us like a higher fee, but they're actually getting an active install that's being utilized. And I just wanted to understand that. Thank you for your comment.
Yeah.
Generally, that space is for us is just hardcore performance marketing.
Yeah.
So search, paid social, affiliate, a lot of just super performance-driven stuff.
You're getting way more efficiency.
Yeah,
there, right?
There's a lot less risk, to be honest.
All right, well, I think we've gone over, but the panelists will be up here afterwards if you have any additional questions. So thank you very much for attending, and have a great afternoon.
I got my new hair.